back to the event, everyone. Like we said, in the final session of today's event, we have all of our speakers back for a roundtable discussion on PiML, and we also, in addition, welcome Rafic Fahs, who is Chief Model Risk Officer at Fifth Third Bank, who will also be participating in the panel. To refresh, the sessions today have touched on the value proposition of PiML, its key features, its applications to evaluating model fairness, and opportunities to enterprise that it represents. Now, in this roundtable, we're going to explore a variety of other aspects of PiML and will benefit from the combined expertise of the panel. We have had a few questions that have come in the chat that haven't been addressed. Agus, thank you very much for replying to those in chat. But to get started, I guess there's a bit of a technical issue. Someone's microphone is picking up some background noise. Can everybody mute briefly? Okay, and then you can demute. Rafic, it seems that you've got some background noise. Is there? We'll proceed. We'll proceed and see if we can resolve that. So I think where I'd like to start, we've heard a lot about PiML, and again, it's what it is and what it can do. I'm curious to hear a bit. Where did PiML come from? What needs drove and motivated its creation initially? What's its origin story? Agus, would you be the best person to start on that?
Yeah. So maybe. So I think a lot of conversation among friends, right? But the practice that we do in banking. So Rafic spoke about this as well, because we are very heavily regulated industry. We have SR 11.7 regulator come to us all the time asking. So it's accumulation of practice and the thinking that we believe all models are wrong. And when models are wrong, they create harm, either harm the institution or harm the people. So with that in mind, with the discipline that in mind, we're looking at, okay, what can we do? First of all, is there any tool out there? So we would like to use those tools out there, but we don't see any of those tools available. The vendor tool and typical data science tool really focus narrowly on model building and looking at the performance as a very one-dimensional, looking at the performance and performance only. And then also the big needs in our area, which I think in other area too, in terms of inherently interpretable model. Patrick spoke about this as well. A lot of problem that we have with post hoc explainability. And when people talk about XAI, they talk about post hoc explainability tool. They are tool, they are approximation, and they can be wrong and difficult to for the more complex the model. This tool can be more wrong. And if you want to experience it yourself, try PiML and compare for inherent interpretable model, then apply post hoc explainer compared to exact explanation. So all those motivation, the worry that we have in terms of model risk. So we're thinking about what can we make the model, the tool that address model risk be accessible easily for everybody. For large bank like us, we have the resource to do. But for many institutions that the smaller size, they don't have the resource that we have, and it can be problematic applying machine learning blindly, and the over enthusiasm on machine learning. It can create a lot of harm.
Indeed. Any other? Yeah, please.
I think one thing I'd like to add is just the sort of amazing thing about Agus being able to make this product and make it open access. I think he really deserves a lot of credit there, because I work with virtually every major lender in the US, and none of them are jumping at the opportunity to give away technology. And so I think the fact that Agus and Wells Fargo have done this, it really should be commended and pointed out.
Definitely. Thanks for bringing that up, Nick. I was just going to jump in really quickly because I saw a question way up in the chat that I didn't see before. Maybe it came when I was presenting or something about, how do we even do explainability, and can it be done for credit models? And I think the answer is yes. But the key is, like Agus said, and this is what I want to emphasize, I don't know of any way to check explanations, really check them against some kind of ground truth, unless you use an underlying interpretable model. And so that's a message I like to put forward, is that, the explanation techniques themselves are machine learning. They can easily go wrong, and they need to be tested. And there are these nearest neighbors and stability tests that you can run that I think are great and you should do. But the ideal scenario is being able to test the sort of necessary post hoc explanation that would be turned into an adverse action notice eventually, being able to test that against the inherently interpretable model. And as Agus pointed out, you might be very surprised at what you see when you start doing that kind of testing. So I've talked a lot. I'm going to shut up and let others jump in, but just test, you have to have that interpretable model is the answer to how do you do transparency in machine learning. That's the real answer.
I just want to add one more thing. So, when I teach machine learning to students, you have a lot of tools available. And typically, if you want to go and implement something, you will always have, either a paper, or you'll go into a GitHub repo and just kind of, pull out an example and try it out. But for an enterprise, that's not going to be sufficient. And they won't be, people who are eager to just go and test out multiple things and see, okay, can we do this? Can we do it? On the other hand, you have a whole ecosystem of products, which are typically, there is nothing beyond the screen available. And the value proposition is you're going to see a bunch of values and charts and graphs, which can be downloaded, right? And that's where I see this notion of what's called as an implementation gap, because practitioners really need to understand what's actually happening behind the scenes, but also need to be comfortable enough to actually do it on their own and build in their assumptions, build in their data sets, build in their use cases, without having to delve deep into kind of starting from scratch, or just accept what's available out of the box. And I think that's where the happy medium is provided by PiML, wherein you can really understand what's actually happening behind the scenes, but you also have the tools and the methodologies so that you can actually implement it and understand what's happening. And as I was mentioning before, Agus and team, with all the papers, with all the research that are done internally, they've made those methodologies transparent to let people go and delve deep into what's actually happening, but also have integrated the various, APIs, if you will, and provided a coherent common interface through which you could actually access those methodologies. And it's free. So I think that's one of the key drivers wherein, you have the ability to not only just kind of see the concepts at a distance, but you can try it on and work with it. So I think that's one of the major reasons why we were really thrilled to kind of work with it.
Yeah, just to add to the rest of the speakers, I want to thank Agus for introducing me to PiML, and we did a lot of workshop between the two teams, and it was as a tool, it's very powerful, and let me tell you why. From my experience as a model developer and now in model risk management, there's many ways to build a model. There's many ways to look at the model, break it down, and try to understand. And specifically when it comes to machine learning AI types model, treatment effects are this is where machine learning comes into action when you have treatment effects. If you're in a deep subprime, treatment effects is so significant. The model stability across time, where Agus calls environmental shift, that happens over and over. So the question is, if you build models, how do you detect, what we call data drift, concept drift, covariate drift, probability, the target bad rate drift. So the question is, how do we use these tools to address the treatment effects or the structural change or environmental change that you see in the model? So these types of tools, besides the explainability, which is superior to everything that I've seen, and how do you use the combination of both approaches, meaning looking at inherent models that are built inherently or post hoc explainability, using both to come up with a trustworthy model that you can use. And reaching out to what Nicholas was talking about in terms of bias testing, this is where you as a model risk management, there's always a trade-off between bias and performance, goodness of fit. So the question is, how do you do that trade-off? And you're suppressing, you're debiasing the model. What are the techniques? What is the right way to do it? These kind of tools help practitioners and model risk management to understand the underlying trade-off and how to address bias. There's no single measure or metric, and I like everything that you described, because basically, if you come up with a metric, is this the only metric you should be using? If you come up with a threshold, why this threshold is the right threshold, and so on and so on. I stop here and let the rest of the speakers to add to what I'm talking about. But thank you.
So yeah, that provided a great sense of the background. Another question that is kind of the inverse of that. So you mentioned that PiML has strong origins in finance, because it's a highly regulated industry. There's a lot of drive to do ML very carefully and very well. In discussions leading up to the event, you've talked about how you feel that there's broad applicability of this. Pardon my videos. Hiccuping. Broad applicability of PiML outside of finance as well. Can you speak a bit on that applicability and the areas of application, the sectors that you'd like to see PiML use expand into?
I'll jump in very quickly and say that, I and I'm sure others on the call have very interesting experiences too, but we've used this type of tooling in audits of very sophisticated large language model systems like Roberta, which was sort of the cutting edge before ChatGPT. But the rub there, how does that happen? Even if you're dealing with a very complex generative AI system, there's usually just some yes or no question that you end up answering. And in my case, we were doing named entity recognition. So the yes or no question was, were entities detected correctly, yes or no? And as soon as you transition from the sort of generative, the generative output to a more targeted classification output, which we're often doing, then tools like PiML work great. And so, I know for a fact these tools can be used on even, the most cutting AI systems with a little bit of elbow grease and creativity. And so I'll leave it to the other panelists to chime in there. But we've used these approaches on very sophisticated AI systems already.
And we're using them in healthcare quite a bit. And that to me is one of the most important opportunities, because there is horrible discrimination that has been present in healthcare outcomes in the United States. And it continues because the data that are used to build healthcare models incorporate that discrimination. And so to be able to use these tools in the environment in healthcare, it's really the first time that that I know of that really robust model risk management practices are being brought into the industry at an enterprise level. One of the things that I've realized working with Agus and others at other institutions is that consumer finance and finance generally has by far the best model risk management standards and practices. And what I really hope is, and what I think Sri and all of us are working on, is bringing those into different industries where they're sorely needed. And I think PiML is the tool that can help do that, because it's pretty easy to use. I mean, even I can use the high code version. That's saying something. So that's really where I see it moving, is anybody who's using a model, but the models that kill people, that's where they really need to be used. And that's healthcare driving all the examples that Patrick gave.
I was just came back from the Federal Reserve Conference in Atlanta yesterday, And we spoke about this, like the finance industry has practiced the model risk management for the last 10 years. So we have maturing practice. So those like people like Rafic and I, we've been in this business for a long time now. This is what we create all this PiML and try to make it accessible. But like Nick said and Patrick said, the opportunity for other industry, they're really critical. Healthcare industry, the algorithm can kill people, and so wrong decision is going to be a really huge implication. Yet other industry don't have the practice of MRM. I think it's emerging now in the name of responsible AI or some sort of that. But I think that's what we hope, that the people will apply MRM very rigorously in all aspects. And if we can contribute in small amount through PiML, the technical side, start from this. Patrick talked about this is the technical aspect, then you grow it to the rigorous governance aspect. So we just try to make it easily accessible to, in particular as well, for the smaller institution. Now I'm part of RMA, Risk Management Association. We have thousands of banks in the US. Yeah, the big banks, they can do all this thing. Rafic has a lot of people that specialize on this, but the smaller bank cannot do it, or smaller companies. So now, even with the things in the New York employment, right? We have Rachel C here on the call from EOC. Is a smaller company that using tool, they are on the hook to use the tool appropriately. They have to test it. How would you do it? So this is the thing that we're trying to do. If, like, for example, even if somebody want to use a vendor model or a black box model, if they want to test it, you can build a challenger model. You can build benchmark very easily using interpretable model in PiML. So with the data that I have, I can build it, I can compare. So people can do testing. Even if somebody's decide, I am going to use black box, can I trust the black box? Let me compare it with inherently interpretable model. If I apply post hoc explainability on black box model, let me compare with my post hoc explainability or the explanation from inherently interpretable model. Are they sensible? So that's what we hope with all of these, to make it easily accessible for other industry or people or company with different scale and size. So Rafic is very.
I want to add to what Agus is saying. We have if you look at the market today and you look at turnover, and you're looking at sustainability in your staffing, specifically when it comes to a topic like AI ML. So having PiML in as part of your tools, you can hire graduate students because it gives them the discipline. The learning curve is going to be very short, and it gives you guards. The codes are well defined. You can use it. The learning curve for a new beginner coming from a graduate institution to start working in your company, it helps to, the learning curve is going to be very fast. It maintains sustainability going forward, given the turnover, the need for the skill set of individuals in AI ML. I see this as a valuable tool to use internally. Besides, like, if we're a big organization, we have smart people working for us, but these smart people can leave tomorrow based on the need of the industry, and that tool is for sustainability is a must.
And Brian, Rafiq, and a few other banks learning using this, right? So several large banks in the US, medium size, learning the tool, they train the peoples. But I think it's more important are really other industry beyond banking to really embracing a responsible use of model, and we just making a small contribution for that.
Mm-hmm. Indeed. At this point, I think it makes sense to bring in one of the questions that was asked in chat from, and apologies if I pronounced the name wrong, from Digvijay Rawat. He asks how difficult it is, the documentation and reporting of explainability or other features of an ML model when you want to communicate that to regulators. So a lot of the discussion in the event so far has been about, if I understand it correctly, internal evaluation. So the people who are developing the model can be sure that they are doing it well and that the model is performing with managed bias and all these sorts of things. But bringing the regulatory considerations into this, how does PiML help? Can it help? What are the plans to make it to help so you can analyze your models and prepare that report in a way that it is easy to communicate to the regulators that are concerned with those aspects?
I think Patrick answered this one a little bit before. So I think from me is really, if you have to explain black box, you start from difficult start, particularly for highly critical model. If you want to do credit underwriting, applying black box model, and you try to explain sharp to people, then good luck, right? So then you have to explain the weakness because people will challenge. But that itself is the approximation. Can you tell me about the problem with that and how going to deal with that? So I think that's the problem. That's the difficulty dealing with the black box model for highly critical area, especially highly regulated. If you start with inherently interpretable model, so people can try, and PiML is very easy, right? You build inherently interpretable model, then you build your black box model, you put it in PiML. You can do it too. And then you compare and then say, okay, with the 4% or 3% improvement that you get from black box, is it worth it, right? So that's first. Secondly, when this distribution shift, or when the error injected noise change, you have very small concept drift, which that's real world. You have data drift. Do you still have that 3%? The answer is most of the time, no, that disappear. In fact, model that's very complicated typically will be less robust because it's more overfit. So things change a little bit. Your advantage of 3% gain or 1% gain that when you kegel, in the real world, the minute you deploy, that advantage disappear. So I think that's what we're trying to bring here is the easy to use and easy to explain. If you're dealing with inherently interpretable model, it's from there, model can be explained very exactly. So it's bringing the experience from us because we deploying model. Our credit underwriting model, which is very highly regulated, is coming from the tool that you see here. You see the XGB2, you see Caminet. Those are model that's in real application.
Can I jump up on my explainability soapbox for 30 more seconds to kind of echo Agus's comments? I think, I'm a data scientist, I guess some people call me that. And in my interactions with data scientists, I think, if data scientists are sort of primed from Medium, from Twitter, Reddit, whatever it is, to think of explanation as sort of an engineering problem, like which is the best Python package to slap on the end of my pipeline to generate some local feature importance values. But having been at this for a while, and having learned some hard lessons, just to kind of reiterate what Agus was saying, I think the real way to think about explanation is it's unfortunately really difficult. It's unfortunately really difficult to get right. And in fact, if you're just putting some Python package like Shap or Lime on the end of your black box pipeline, your explanations probably are not going to be right. So the issue is it's very difficult and yet necessary, right? Whether we're in consumer finance, we have regulatory obligations to generate adverse action notices, or whether you're in a different high stakes environment, you're going to have to explain your decisions to someone at some point. And so summarization and explanation of these models is necessary, but it's also extremely difficult. And so I think we need to reframe the discussion around explainability a little bit to focus on, the shortcomings of these techniques and how difficult it is to actually generate accurate explanations for complex systems. So I'll yield back to the group now, but just had to get in on that one. And we had a big ongoing conversation about this yesterday, but fun stuff.
And I think that the question about how do you communicate these things to regulators is obviously a very important one. And I think that the answer depends on the regulator. The upper level people at the CFPB, I have found, have become very sophisticated. And if you think you can go into them with SHAP explaining DNN that is just a bunch of garbage, they're going to know it, and they're going to know it quickly. And so, but then there are other regulators where I don't think they've achieved that level of sophistication yet. So you better know your audience if you're walking into an exam. It would be the first thing. The second thing is really talking to a regulator shouldn't be different than anybody else. It's all about telling a story. And what I think about PiML, that PiML does really well, is it gives you the ability to tell a simple but thorough story. It really is capturing all the different elements, the resilience, the explainability, interpretability, fairness. If you put all of that together in a package, you've got a really thorough, and if your model is passing all of those tests, or you've got good reasons for why it's not, you have a very solid model and a solid explanation behind it. But the other thing I like about PiML is that it's pretty simple. That it's not like three-dimensional rotating plots that are some crazy cool thing. It's pretty simple matplotlib stuff, and that's really good when you're trying to tell a story to people who are not necessarily technically proficient. And my experience with regulators is they're smart, they're kind, they're hardworking, they want to do the right thing, but they're not usually technical. And so if you can come to them with a story that's got some nice pictures that aren't too complicated, that tell the story, and you've got a robust, rounded up piece of analysis, you're probably in pretty good shape.
I completely agree with you. Given my years of experience with the regulator, Nicholas, you're spot on. Is the storytelling, and always, the issue is kind of like using machine learning AI. You have to be careful. It's like if you put a kid in a candy store, he'll eat all the Kit Kat, and you know what will happen later, in the evening. But basically, what we want to make sure is when you're building a model from a model development point of view and from our risk management point of view, simplicity is important. If you can achieve building a credit risk model, origination model using the classical, and you're getting a lift, and there is a major reason for you to go away from the traditional because of the complexity of the portfolio that you're working with. The regulators understand that. And specifically, if you're in the deep subprime and there's a lot of treatment meaning a good collector leaves the company tomorrow, you have a shift. You have a significant environmental shift. It depends. If you're in the super prime, things are stable. There's a reason where you move from one portfolio to the other, and the complexity of that portfolio and the treatment effects and the environment that you're in dictates what type of models you should be building. But you start with the simplest among all is the traditional, and you're telling a story. This is the reason why I'm going to the complexity. There is instability when I build a regular, marginal effects. But when I use the, machine learning, I'm getting all the treatments, I'm capturing the treatment, but with that come a cost. You're telling you're speaking to the regulators through a story. This is how I manage the instability, the overfitting. And this is how when it comes to bias, there's always a trade-off. So if I'm trading off on debiasing, it comes to a point that the lift is not there. So the question is, why are you building these models? If I'm debiasing, if FICO can have a 50 or 40 points chaos, just for simplicity, and your new machine learning model gave you 55, there's a 15 points, everybody will be clapping for you in the industry. But when you're debiasing, the difference, the delta between the benchmark and what you have is not that significant. Is it worthy? And the regulators want to see that story. If you don't have it, you're missing the whole point.
Yeah.
But bringing that to the table or failing a model just because of that, you get an award for it. So
and you can do all of those in low code in PiML to show it.
exactly,
And all of those
Well,
things.
and you don't, for the non-modelers on the call, those are important questions. Why did you use the 3 trillion layer deep neural network? And if it's, oh well, Agus used it and he's really smart, and I want to be smart too, that may not be the good explanation. There's a responsibility throughout the organization to be asking questions exactly like what Rafic said, which is, why are we doing this? And if you don't have a satisfactory answer, go back to a simpler model.
I just want to add, we get this question a lot, can I take your course, and based on what you prescribe, does it satisfy the regulators? And the answer is no. I mean, there is no prescriptive, methodology which has been published by the regulator saying that this is what you need to do. And that's why, when I shared the slide about the regulatory efforts, we haven't seen one yet where in every industry for every particular use case, this is exactly what needs to be done. And that's an evolving field. And people who have been tracking the New York bias audit law have already seen this, the number of comments which have gone in for that particular law, and the number of postponements which have happened for even the law to be, enforced. So now it's kind of moved to April. And the problem is, we are kind of, it's a chicken and egg problem. So, what comes first? Is it the maturity of the workflows and everything has been established, and now we are going to be adhering to certain prescriptions? Or are you taking an innovative approach of doing things, and you have tested out with traditional approaches, and you see that there is some value with innovative approaches, and do we just blindly adopt this innovative approach, or also build in the mechanisms to understand these innovative approaches, and also building the governance and the risk mechanisms to address the potential changes which could potentially be in the process? And I think that's what probably regulators will look for on the due diligence and ownership you have taken in order to build out these tests. And that's why I'm not a big fan of just the canned reports or model cards or data cards, if you will, to have a checklist approach to say, oh, we have done what was expected, or this is a paper which prescribed this particular template of a description of a model, and we have done these particular things, and we are good to go, kind of a thing. It should not be a gating process. And I think that's where the tool like PiML will potentially help you kind of go into the models and understand. And as Nick was mentioning, why is this trillion parameter model being used? Well, if you cannot answer it, then you just basically just replicated what was available out there, hoping that things will go fine. And I think that's all going to be a cause of disasters. I think from a regulator's perspective, the due diligence aspect is going to be very important on what have you done before adopting it into your standardization process.
And Shri, it's also, from my experience in model development, you can learn a lot from your complex AI ML to address the shortcoming of your traditional models. So you can have both work, and accordingly, you can decide what to bring to the table. And as Agus was saying, there's some trade-off. So if it's a 5%, why go through the headache? If it's 10%, there is what I call the risk appetite, or the model risk appetite, where you can draw the line. You need that maturity, to address it. But having a tool like PiML, it's super important in both sides. You can use it to build a complicated model, and you can use it to explore and look at the uncertainty of the model, look at data drifts, look at it. It helps you to understand the traditional much better than just going through the traditional funneling, data correlation, the traditional recipe of model build. So that is the one way to do it.
Indeed.
Brian, may I answer one question that I think their question that can be the smaller MRM team how can they use to validate black box?
Perfect. Yeah. Since we're running up on the end of the time, that's exactly where I was headed. Like, how can people get started with PiML? Yes, please.
Yeah, this is a very typical, like, okay, we buy vendor solution is a black box. How can I use PiML to do this? This is important to say. In a vendor model black box, you don't know what's in it. You get the outcome. You can test it as a black box, and you can get the explanation, right? From the black box, you can get the PDP. You can get all of those. Now, the beauty is, if then you apply PiML, use that same data, you build inherently interpretable model, get the PDP, get the exact explanation for PiML, and then you compare. And then you say, how is this black box compared to benchmark model that I built in PiML? And then you can see it as well, how the performance. So I think it's very important, if you have a black box model, at the very least, use PiML as a benchmark. You build it yourself, inherent interpretable, compare with the black box explainer, compare on the performance with various conditions.
Can I give a very self-serving answer to that question? So where do you start? To me, the easiest place to start is in the fairness testing, because that requires the least amount of code, effort, knowledge, anything. It's really just, do you have the outcome you're interested in and information about protected class status or estimates of it? Got that? It's 8 columns, 8 to 12 columns, and you can do fairness testing. That's a good way to get started with PiML, and then you can go into the cool stuff from there.
And then you give a headache to the vendor, and now
and after you tell your vendor that their model is biased,
go back and debias it.
Any last thoughts there before we wrap up? Okay, well, thank you very much to all of our speakers and our roundtable panel for participating in the event today. Thank you very much to everyone in the audience for attending and also all the great questions that came in. We're very excited about PiML here and its potential to make a big impact on the practice of AI and ML. It's a bit of bookkeeping. The event has been recorded, and we will be posting recordings of all the sessions to the Open Teams YouTube channel once we have them prepared. And I believe the plan is we'll collect up links to the various the repos and notebooks and things that our participants have to share, and that'll come out in an email to all the attendees, the registrants, after the event is over. That's all we have for today. Remember, my video again. Open Teams gives you access to the best open source architects in the world to help you train, support, and deliver your software solutions. Please go to openteams.com to learn more, to get to know our open source architect network, or to apply to become an OSA. The information's all there. Agus, Rafic, Shri, Patrick, Nick, thank you so much for your time and your input and insights. We really appreciate it. Enjoy the rest of your Friday.
Thank you so much, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.